August 1997. In a Paris tunnel, a princess dies. The world mourns an English rose. A fairy tale shattered by a reckless driver. But this wasn't just a tragedy, it was a correction. The final violent chapter in a 500-year-old story about blood power and a debt the crown could never repay. Princess Diana was no commoner who stumbled into royalty. She was the living embodiment of a genetic vault, a bloodline reservoir. Meticulously curated for centuries, her veins didn't just carry aristocratic blood, they carried the dormant DNA of forgotten kings, Tudors, Plantagenets, Stewarts, including the potent illegitimate lines the official story tried to delete. She was a walking, talking archive of royal history the monarchy preferred to keep buried. So how does a 20th century marriage designed to save the modern monarchy become a dangerous genetic reunification, placing the most volatile English bloodlines back within reach of the throne? How did a woman chosen for her perceived innocence become the system's greatest threat simply by being born? It turns out the curse wasn't a speeding car in a Paris tunnel. It was a genetic time bomb written into her family tree. And Diana's tragedy wasn't her death. It was her designated role to serve as the perfect genetic bridge reuniting the crown's fractured bloodlines, and to be discarded the moment the future of the monarchy. An heir who carried it all was secure. The Tudor court was a blast furnace, and for every family that was forged into power, 10 were melted down into cautionary tales. The Howards, the Boleyns, the Greys, they all reached for the sun only to have their wings burn away their ashes scattered by royal decree. But as the great houses of England gambled and lost, the Spencers watched, they learned, and they played an entirely different game. Their prize wasn't a seat at the king's council, it was survival. While Henry VIII was executing his wives and purging any relative with a trace of rival Plantagenet blood, the Spencers were perfecting the art of strategic obscurity. A sensible person would pivot away from danger. The Spencers did not pivot. They made a science of being underestimated. Their strategy was brilliant in its subtlety. They became the keepers of the flame, not by guarding the fire, but by collecting the embers everyone else discarded. They became a living library of politically inconvenient DNA. While the king was executing the 70-year-old Countess of Salisbury for the crime of her Plantagenet blood, the Spencers were quietly arranging a marriage for their son with the daughter of a less conspicuous noble house, a house that just happened to carry a diluted strain of that same forbidden bloodline. They understood the fundamental rule of the Tudor court: visibility was a fatal disease, and so they began to fill their genetic reservoir. They married into the descendants of the Stewarts, absorbing the royal blood of Scotland. Crucially, they wove in the threads of the Tudors' own secret history. Through marriages to families like the Careys, they likely absorbed the lineage of Mary Boleyn, and with it, the rumored illegitimate blood of King Henry VIII himself. Through other connections, they linked themselves to the bastard lines of King Charles II. These were bloodlines of immense symbolic power, but zero legal claim, genetically priceless, yet politically safe. The Spencers weren't building a claim to the throne. They were building a different kind of legitimacy, one rooted in the complete uncensored story of England's royal blood. They were patiently constructing the perfect genetic vault, the only flaw in their centuries-long plan. They never considered that one day the crown itself would come looking for the key. For the next 300 years, the Spencer bloodline went dormant. The dangerous, volatile DNA of Tudors and Stewarts was safely diluted in a sea of aristocratic Englishness. The family became fabulously wealthy, their power measured in acres of land and flocks of sheep, not proximity to the throne. The survival instinct that had been honed in the Tudor crucible became a quiet, confident family culture. The portraits of their royal-adjacent ancestors hung in the long gallery at Althorpe, their secrets hidden in plain sight, their stories reduced to charming anecdotes rather than political manifestos. The genetic reservoir was full locked and forgotten. During this long hibernation, a strange inversion occurred. While the Spencers became the very definition of the native English aristocracy, the royal family itself became progressively more foreign. The House of Stuart gave way to the German House of Hanover. Queen Victoria, the grandmother of Europe, married a German prince, Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. Her descendants ruled under that German name until the First World War forced a hasty cosmetic rebranding to the House of Windsor. By the 20th century, the British monarchy was in terms of blood a thoroughly German institution, ruling over a people with whom they shared little genetic heritage. The Spencers, meanwhile, had spent those same centuries embedding themselves deeper into the English soil. Their commoner status was the ultimate illusion. They were by blood and culture more authentically English than the family wearing the crown. They had become so perfectly quintessentially English that they were practically invisible to the throne as a political force. They had become perfectly safe, and in doing so, they had become the perfect trap. By the late 1970s, the House of Windsor had a problem. Prince Charles, the heir to the throne, was 30 years old and unmarried. The firm needed a bride, and the checklist was a paradox. She had to be an aristocrat, but with no political baggage. She had to be a Protestant virgin, and in an era of growing anti-monarchist sentiment, she needed to be relatable an English rose who could soften the monarchy's stiff foreign image. The royal machine, with its centuries of experience in managing bloodlines, began its search for a blank slate. They found Lady Diana Spencer. On paper, she was flawless. The shy 19-year-old daughter of an earl from a family of impeccable loyalty and no recent political ambition. She seemed quiet, malleable, the ideal vessel to produce the next generation of kings. The system ran a background check, but they forgot to read the genetic source code. They saw a naive girl. They failed to see the 500-year-old survivor staring back. The wedding of Charles and Diana in 1981 was not a fairy tale. It was a genetic reunification. It was the moment the modern Germanized House of Windsor, in a desperate move for public adoration and a dose of native legitimacy, plugged its lineage directly back into the ancient, volatile, charismatic blood of England itself. They thought they were importing a country rose to decorate the palace. What they were actually doing was downloading a 500-year-old operating system of survival charm and rebellion directly into the mainframe. The assimilation never happened. Instead, an activation began. The immense pressure of the monarchy, the cold indifference of the family, the relentless obsession of the global media, these forces did not create the Diana the world came to know. They awakened her. They triggered the dormant instincts of her Spencer ancestors, the ones who had learned how to navigate the deadly politics of the Tudor court. The ability to build alliances, the mastery of public image, the quiet defiance and the magnetic charisma that could turn the public into a personal army. It was all there waiting. The Spencer bloodline, forged in fire and hidden for centuries, was now back inside the palace walls. The quiet genetic experiment of the Spencers was over. The loud, chaotic, and revolutionary experiment of Diana had just begun. So how was this extraordinary genetic trap set? How did one family, the Spencers, manage to play a game of survival that spanned 5 centuries, culminating in the arrival of Diana to understand the chilling genius of their long game? We must first understand the world that wrote the rules. We must rewind the clock to the 16th century, to the paranoid, glittering, and lethal court of the Tudors, the blast furnace that forged the very concept of blood as a weapon. Before the Tudors' power in England was a blunter instrument. Aristocratic marriage was a business transaction, a cold but straightforward merger of land and assets. The Spencers of the 15th century were adept players, using their children as pawns to capture territory on the great chessboard of the English shires. The language was sterile. Advantageous matches, consolidation of properties, and the human cost was a private matter, a daughter's quiet sacrifice for the family ledger. The system was predictable, it was stable, and then a usurper seized the throne, and in his desperate need for legitimacy, he rewrote the very definition of power. When Henry Tudor became King Henry VII in 1485, he held the crown by conquest, not by divine right. He needed a new kind of magic, a narrative powerful enough to make his stolen throne seem preordained. He found it in blood. His marriage to Elizabeth of York was not a union of love, but of propaganda. It was the invention of a single, correct, royal bloodline. Suddenly, genealogy was no longer a hobby for dusty old men. It was the supreme political science. A new technical vocabulary entered the court: pedigree, claim, line of succession. Your ancestors were now your resume, and a single flaw could render you irrelevant. It was this new system that the Spencers learned to exploit. They watched as Henry VIII, driven by his obsession for a male heir, turned the court into a high-stakes genetic experiment. The quest for a pure and legitimate bloodline became a national psychosis. An entire kingdom held its breath, its fate hanging on the reproductive performance of the queen. The language of the court became that of the breeding stable queens, were judged by their fertility, and families who provided a proven vessel like the Boleyns were catapulted to unimaginable power. But the Spencers, watching from a safe distance, saw the terrifying flip side of this coin. They saw that the reward for success was matched only by the penalty for failure. It was in this crucible that the Spencer strategy was forged. They saw Anne Boleyn, a woman who flew too close to the sun, celebrated for her potent blood one moment, and executed as a traitor the next when her body failed to produce a son. They learned the court's most vital lesson: the inner circle is a death trap. So they began their quiet, methodical work. They did not seek the king's bedchamber. Instead, they sought out and married into the families of the sidelined, the dispossessed, the ones whose royal blood was now considered a dangerous liability. They became collectors of forbidden genes. A king's bastard like Henry Fitzroy, or his rumored daughter Catherine Carey, was a paradox, carrying the priceless royal DNA but no legal claim. While the crown saw them as threats to be managed or eliminated, the Spencers saw them as undervalued assets. Through careful marriages, they absorbed these potent but unofficial royal streams, building their genetic reservoir in the quiet shade, while other families burned in the glare of the throne. By the end of the Tudor reign, the system had metastasized into a paranoid machine of extermination. Under the insecure rule of Henry's children and their Stuart successors, possessing the wrong kind of royal blood was no longer a disadvantage. It was an active death sentence. The crime was not what you did, it was who you were. Women like the elderly Margaret Pole and the teenage Lady Jane Grey were judicially murdered for the crime of their DNA. Their very existence was a threat, so they had to be erased. This terror was the final proof of the Spencer family's genius. While the crown was busy pruning its family tree with an executioner's axe, the Spencers were patiently cultivating a rich, diverse ecosystem of royal bloodlines. They were hiding the monarchy's complete, uncensored genetic history in plain sight under the guise of being simple country aristocrats. This was the world that created the Spencer bloodline, a world of paranoia, ambition, and extermination that taught them one singular lesson. The true power wasn't about seizing the crown, but about having the patience and cunning to survive long enough to one day create a king. Now, with this context understood, we can return to the 20th century and open the case file. Let us begin the autopsy of how this 500-year-old curse, this legacy of survival and stored potential, played out in the life and death of Princess Diana. We have traced the origins of the curse back to the blood-soaked soil of Tudor England. We have seen how the Spencer family forged a unique strategy of genetic survival, turning their lineage into a quiet reservoir of sidelined and forgotten royal power. And we have witnessed the moment of its activation in the 20th century, when this dormant power was reintroduced into the very heart of the monarchy. Now we enter the chamber itself. We leave the grand sweep of history behind and pick up the scalpel of forensic analysis. It is time to open the case file on the marriage of Charles and Diana, to examine the evidence and to conduct the autopsy of a union that was destined for collision from the moment it was conceived. The official story is a masterpiece of simplistic tragedy, a nursery rhyme for public consumption. It goes like this: a sweet, naive commoner, an English rose, was chosen by a prince, entered a cold and unloving family she did not understand, and was ultimately broken by the rigid, cruel machinery of the crown. It is a simple, sad, and satisfying story, and it is almost entirely wrong. Let us dismiss this fiction and proceed to the evidence. The greatest deception was the label commoner. It was a lie of omission so profound it bordered on genius. Diana Spencer was not an outsider breaching the walls of royalty. She was the product of a parallel royal lineage that had simply been playing a longer, quieter game. Let us be precise. The House of Windsor, by the 20th century, was fundamentally a German dynasty. Their power was secured by Queen Victoria, but their blood was that of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha-Battenberg and Hesse. Prince Charles, for all his titles, possessed a lineage that was more German than English. Diana, on the other hand, was a walking, talking map of English and Scottish royal history. Her veins carried more of the blood of native British kings than her husband's. She was a direct descendant of King Charles II through two of his illegitimate sons. She was descended from his brother, King James the Haggard. Her family tree reached back unbroken into the ancient aristocracy, connecting her to the great houses that had fought the Wars of the Roses and navigated the lethal currents of the Tudor court. And here in the deepest archives of her DNA lies the most potent secret. Her lineage connects directly to the Tudors through the Carey family descendants of Mary Boleyn, sister of Anne and mistress to King Henry VIII, before he ever looked at her sister. Historians debate the paternity of Mary's children, but the tantalizing possibility remains that Diana carried the direct, albeit illegitimate blood of Henry VIII himself. For 5 centuries, the Spencers had acted as a genetic vault. They absorbed these powerful, dangerous bloodlines, the illegitimate Stewarts, the forgotten Tudors, the sideline Plantagenets, and stored them generation after generation. They were not merely aristocratic, they were a living reservoir of the crown's own shadow history. When the Windsors chose Diana, they thought they were getting a dose of pure, simple Englishness to dilute their own foreign blood. What they actually did was inject 500 years of royal intrigue, ambition, and charismatic power directly into the main line of succession. Now we leave the documented certainty of the family tree and enter the antechamber of high-grade speculation. The official story holds that Diana's selection was a matter of circumstance, a happy accident of her being in the right place at the right time with the right qualifications. But the patterns are too convenient, too precise. Consider the firm's problem in the 1970s, an heir in need of a wife and a monarchy whose popularity was waning. Sources within the palace have long whispered that the search for a bride was far more clinical than the public ever knew. This was not a romantic quest, it was a strategic acquisition. And in an age of advancing science, is it so unthinkable that the criteria went beyond mere titles and family connections? The theory, and we must label it as such, is that the Windsors were engaged in a form of dynastic eugenics. They were not just looking for a good girl from a good family. They were looking for a specific genetic profile. They needed to reconnect with the deep native power of the land they ruled. They needed a bride who carried the bloodline imprints of the charismatic Tudors and the resilient Stewarts. The whispers speak of secret genealogical studies of candidates being vetted not just for their purity, but for their genetic potency. In this speculative narrative, Diana wasn't just a lucky candidate, she was the jackpot. Her lineage, so carefully curated by the Spencers, made her the perfect genetic bridge. She possessed all the dormant historical power the Windsors lacked, but it was housed in a vessel that seemed unassuming, unthreatening, and controllable. Was she chosen because a secret committee, armed with classified documents and genealogical charts far more detailed than anything the public has ever seen, identified her as the one woman in England who could perform the ultimate act of dynastic alchemy? We have no definitive proof, but in a system so utterly obsessed with bloodline, to believe that genetics played no part in the selection of the mother of the future king is perhaps the most naive assumption of all. The machine does not leave its most important calculation to chance. Regardless of whether Diana's selection was accidental or engineered, the outcome is an undeniable historical fact. The births of Prince William and Prince Harry were not just the creation of heirs, they were the successful completion of the genetic reunification. In Prince William, the two great rival streams of the British monarchy were finally merged. Through his father, he inherits the legitimate formal and Germanic lineage of the Windsors, stretching back to the Hanoverians and Queen Victoria. It is a bloodline of duty, of distance, of survival, through rigid adherence to protocol. But through his mother, he inherits something else entirely. he inherits the shadow history of the crown. He carries the blood of the charismatic populist and often reckless Stuart kings. He carries the ruthless, brilliant, and revolutionary DNA of the Tudors. He is the repository of the Spencer family's 500-year strategy of survival. He is the living bridge between the official story and the parts that were written out. When William takes the throne, he will be the first monarch since the 17th century to so powerfully embody all the fractured, contradictory bloodlines of the nation he rules. He is not merely a Windsor. He is the product of the Spencer Reservoir. He is the reconciliation of the legitimate and the illegitimate, the official and the suppressed. Harry, free from the direct line of succession, embodies the more volatile, independent, and rebellious nature of this genetic cocktail. He is the Spencer instinct untethered from the Windsor machine. This was the ultimate purpose of the union, to create heirs who could heal the historical schism in the crown's own blood, to produce a future king who was not just a symbol of the state, but a genetic embodiment of the entire nation's complex and often bloody history. The curse of Diana was never supernatural. It was a fundamental, irreconcilable conflict between two operating systems of power. The House of Windsor runs on the software of mystique. Their power is derived from their distance, their otherness, their carefully cultivated image as symbols rather than people. They are powerful because they are not like us. Diana, however, was the activation of the Spencer family's dormant software, the power of charisma. It is a power derived from connection, from empathy, from the ability to inspire personal devotion in the public. She was powerful because people felt she was one of them. A system built on mystique cannot tolerate a star who operates on charisma. A monarchy that survives by being remote cannot contain a princess who thrives by being intimate. It was an inevitable system crash. The pressure the firm applied to her, the isolation, the criticism, it was all designed to force her to run their software. Instead, it simply caused her own native programming to come roaring to life. So here is the final autopsy report. The curse was not a Tudor ghost haunting a princess. It was a dormant charismatic power encoded in her DNA, amplified and activated by a rigid, fearful system that only understands power through control and distance. They didn't just marry the wrong person. They accidentally rebooted their own deepest, most dangerous history. We have now concluded the autopsy. We have followed the threads of this curse from the paranoid halls of Tudor palaces to the flashbulb-lit streets of modern London. We have examined the evidence, the genealogical charts that read like secret histories, the speculative protocols of selection, and the living proof in the DNA of future kings. All that remains is the verdict and the long haunting echo this story leaves behind. Let us be clear. The House of Windsor did not break Diana Spencer. They activated her. In their calculated search for a docile aristocratic vessel, they committed the ultimate act of historical negligence. They consulted her pedigree but failed to read her history. They sought a blank slate and instead summoned a ghost of pure, undiluted English power, charisma, and defiance that their own system had been designed to suppress for centuries. The tragedy of Diana was not that she was a lamb led to slaughter. The tragedy was that she was a dormant queen who was never meant to awaken. The marriage was a genetic gamble designed to solve a PR problem and secure the succession. In that, it was a spectacular success. It produced the heir, a future king who would carry the unified blood of the entire fractured royal story. But the experiment had an unforeseen side effect. The catalyst, Diana, was not consumed in the reaction. Instead, the immense pressure of the royal machine, its coldness, its rigidity, its demand for absolute submission, acted as the final trigger. It awoke the dormant Spencer operating system, the 500-year-old code of survival, public charm, and ruthless political instinct. She was not a system failure. She was an unintended and uncontrollable system feature. She was not the victim of the curse. She was the curse. A curse of consciousness sent to remind a forgetful monarchy precisely who they were and who they were not. Her purpose, it seems, was to deliver the heir and in the process to burn down the temple of mystique that had protected the crown for a century. In both tasks, she succeeded beyond anyone's wildest imagination. The aftershocks of that activation are still shaking the foundations of the monarchy today. Diana's life was a seismic event, and its ripple effects continue to define the landscape of the British crown, its media, and its people. First and most devastatingly, she shattered the illusion of mystique forever. Before Diana, the monarchy operated behind a veil of sacred, unknowable grandeur. They were symbols, not people. Diana ripped that veil away. Her Panorama interview in 1995 was the single most destructive act of transparency in modern royal history. She invited the world into the cold, dysfunctional heart of the firm and showed them not divine symbols, but flawed, jealous, and painfully human people. The public, once content to gaze up at an enigma, had now been shown the wiring, the dust, and the cracks in the walls. That knowledge can never be unlearned. The deference has been replaced by scrutiny. Every action, every statement, every public appearance by a royal is now viewed through the cynical knowing lens that Diana provided. She taught the public to question, and the monarchy has been struggling to answer ever since. Second, the curse did not die with her in that Paris tunnel. It was passed on in its full, unresolved complexity to her sons. In William and Harry, we see the two warring halves of Diana's legacy in human form. Prince William the heir is the embodiment of the genetic reunification. He is the tightrope walker, forever balancing the rigid, dutiful programming of the Windsors with the charismatic, empathetic touch of the Spencers. Every carefully managed public appearance, every attempt to appear modern yet regal, is a testament to this internal struggle. He is the man tasked with saving the system that his mother nearly destroyed, using the very tools she gave him. He represents the hope that the two operating systems can somehow run on the same hardware without a catastrophic crash. Prince Harry the Spare is what happens when the Spencer operating system rejects the Windsor hardware entirely. His departure from the royal family was not an act of petulance. It was a genetic inevitability. He is the unfiltered echo of his mother, her distrust of the institution, her weaponization of the media, her desire for a direct emotional connection with the public that the firm's protocol forbids. He is the living proof that the charismatic, rebellious Tudor bloodline, once reawakened, cannot easily be contained within the palace walls again. The feud between the brothers is not just a family squabble. It is the dynastic conflict of their ancestors, playing out in real time, a civil war between two different philosophies of power inherited directly from their mother. Third, Diana permanently altered the relationship between the monarchy and the media. She entered a world where the press was deferential, a respectful partner in crafting the royal image. She left behind a world where the press is a ravenous, codependent beast. She learned to use the media as a weapon to bypass the palace courtiers and speak directly to the world. She fed the beast, and in turn it gave her a global platform and immense power. But the beast once fed is never satisfied. It grew more powerful, more intrusive, and ultimately more dangerous. Her death in a chase with paparazzi was the horrific, logical conclusion of the game she had mastered. Today, her children and their wives live in the world she created, where every move is monitored, every photo is worth a fortune, and privacy is a long-forgotten luxury. They are trapped in a feedback loop of exposure and complaint that Diana herself engineered. Finally, she became something the monarchy never intended, a secular saint. Her work on landmines and with AIDS patients was a masterclass in soft power. She demonstrated that a member of the royal family could generate more global goodwill with a single empathetic gesture than the Foreign Office could with a decade of diplomacy. She created a new modern template for royalty, one based on tangible action and emotional resonance, not just on ribbon cutting and waving. It is a benchmark that her successors are still judged against a standard of popular connection that the institution itself is structurally incapable of meeting. In the end, we are left with the quiet, profound irony of it all. History is a logbook of plausible mistakes made with perfect confidence. The House of Windsor, in its moment of perceived weakness, made the most plausible mistake of all. They searched for a simple solution to a complex problem. In their hunt for an English rose to bolster their brand, they forgot to check the deep, tangled, and bloody roots from which she grew. They thought they were marrying a commoner. They ended up marrying their own forgotten history. They sought to control a bloodline and were instead controlled by it. They wanted a quiet, dutiful queen and instead unleashed a charismatic, revolutionary princess. And in their attempt to secure their future, they accidentally reawakened the most potent and unpredictable ghosts of their past. The curse wasn't that Diana was destroyed by the system. The curse is that the system, in its arrogance, created the one person who could expose it for what it truly was, and in doing so was forced to confront the reflection it had been avoiding for centuries. What is your verdict? Was Diana a tragic victim, a genetic time bomb, or a revolutionary force of nature? Was her fate sealed by an ancient Tudor curse or by the modern machinery of celebrity? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if you wish to unlock more of history's most cursed chambers, subscribe to the channel and ring the bell for notifications. Remember, the past is never truly dead. It isn't even past. It's just waiting for the right person to come along and reawaken it.